good afternoon and welcome to the 5th session of Compass 2. And this session is all about the variety of project management methodologies. My name's Donna Hanson and I am the Informatics Project Manager for the Northwest Skills Development Network. And we'll just have a little signposting before the main event. You'll see on the right of your screen a panel with chat and Q&A amongst a few other options. The chat's obvious and the Q&A is there for you to pose your questions to Jo as you think of them. Towards the end of the session, we will have a Q&A session with Jo, if I can stop her from being such a fascinating speaker. And if we don't have enough time for all of the questions, we will get your question answered somehow. Answers, connections, and resources, you may have noticed, are the goodie bag of Connect. A game code will be given on screen shortly to reward you for turning up for the beginning of this session, and there'll be another game code at the end. So now I'd like to introduce you to Jo Stanford. If you attended Project Futures in February or more of Compass, you will have seen Jo holding the ring. So probably best to explain that she has had a distinguished career as a project manager in commerce and government before joining Health Education England to help us all out in the NHS. Thank you, Jo.
Hello again, everybody. I was clearly away when all of the sessions were arranged for this one because I ended up with quite a few of them. I hope you don't mind seeing more of me again this afternoon, but this is a subject really close to my heart and an area I think is of real importance to raise in the NHS and in the project community. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts and insights on this. So please do comment in the chat. I'll be catching up with them afterwards as I won't have a chance to read them during the session. But it's really important for everybody to contribute to this one. So this is going to be a very high level session, give you a broad understanding of some of the different methodologies out there and what kinds of projects they make work best with. The reason for this session is that most people learn one methodology and try to apply that to different project types, and that is like using a hammer to fix all DIY problems. Now, I'm really keen to get your thoughts, put your comments in, talk about the project types you work on, the methodologies you use, and your experiences of them, and responses from the people around you in terms of using them as well. So please get those comments in the chat. We have a couple of polls to start off with, and the first question is, what type of projects do you work on? You can choose more than one, and the options included are transformation, and so we're defining that as a total change from something or someone that is radically different to what came before, that can't be undone, or something that didn't exist before and has been created new. So an example of transformation would be a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. It can't go back to being a caterpillar. Or ingredients are turned into mayonnaise. You cannot disaggregate mayonnaise. So that's a kind of transformation that is complex and big, and that's how we're kind of defining transformation. Service improvements, that's about incremental change to an existing service or product to improve an element of it, whether it's quality, efficiency, or effectiveness. There's digital technology, so electronic tools, systems, devices, and resources that generate, store, or process data. IT, and we're talking about hardware side of it here. So the use of computers, storage, networking, physical devices, the infrastructure that process, create and store all forms of electronic data. We've also got estates and infrastructure as an option. So if you work on those kinds of projects, it'd be really interesting to see how many of you are involved in that. And that's about the physical environment and its component parts that make up its functionality. Organizational change and development, so changes that impact on how the organization operates, its culture, behaviors, and business processes. And then finally, we've got another option, and that might be, if you add in the chat the other kinds of projects that don't necessarily fit within those categories, it'd be really interesting to see what else is going on out there. So having a look at that first one, there's an interesting mix. So we've got a fairly even split here between transformation as service improvement, and then following hard on, we've got digital and organizational change. So that's an interesting and nice mix. we've got lower amounts in sort of IT and estates and infrastructure, not surprising. There's probably not so many opportunities to work on those, but really interesting to see that. So excellent, that's really useful to see. So let's move on now to the next poll. And the next question is, what types of methodologies do you use? And I've gone for some sort of generic ones. So the first one is something like an APM or a Project Management Institute project's lifecycle. So a typical project management lifecycle, Agile, and I'm sorry for the purists, but I'm including all Agile methods in that. So SDM, Kanban, Scrum, etc. Something like Prince2, which is a very structured methodology, managing successful programs, change management methods, so things like the ProSci or the Kotter 8-step model. Lean and Six Sigma I've grouped under operational efficiency, and then we've got quality improvement. So, for example, the Virginia Mason method or the Institute for Health Improvement type methods. And I know there are others out there like that. And then the last option is locally developed or other program or project methods. And I'll be really interested to see how many folks are in the, we've got our own way of doing things here, or you use different methodologies to that. And let's find out what those are. So let's have a look at the results. And that's interesting. Prince2 is way ahead of the game, followed by some APM project management, Agile, and MSP, all at a very similar level. We've got a similar amount that are under locally developed, and I'd be really fascinated to hear what those are and to find out more about those. And little bits in terms of change, lean, and quality improvement, although things are nudging a little bit. But yes, Prince2 is well ahead of the game. That's an interesting observation. I'd be interested to know whether your organization, so that Prince2 users, does your organization also use other methods as well as that, or just that particular one? I'd be interested to find out. Please put your answers in chat. That'd be really helpful. Thank you. So thanks very much for that. Really useful insights. I'm going to start to get into the subject a little bit now, but I will come back at the end and find out if there are ones that you would like to find out more about, because you've been sort of slightly intrigued by what we're covering today. So I'm going to start in terms of talking about project types and methodologies by saying, actually, we need to be really careful when we look at this. So who's the first one in the chat to say which film this picture is from? The one thing about methods and processes and methodologies is it can be too easy to get caught up in following a particular method or process, or become quite evangelical about the particular method or process you follow, and forget both the purpose of what you're trying to do and perhaps the environment at which you're doing it. And I think this sort of exemplifies it. So, as most of you know, this is from Monty Python's Life of Brian, which is about an ordinary man who accidentally ends up saying some things that create a following who, in a very short period of time, break off into factions that are devoted to the interpretations of his sayings and actions. So here we have, you know, half of them breaking off into follow the shoe, and half are saying no, follow the gourd, entirely forgetting the point of his speeches. So when you get caught up in the symbolism of process, you kind of forget the point of why you're doing it, which is why I want to bring you back to why is more important than how. All of the methodologies out there all have value in their own right, in the right context, for the right kind of change, and some of them will be around the people who are using them and how they want to apply them. So this isn't advocating for any one type or method. They all have value. It's about horses for courses, the right tool for the job, that kind of thing. So in terms of looking at the range of methodologies and types, in the NHS project and change capability framework, we actually have a section towards the back, which is that gives this overview of project methodologies and project types. And it's just really an opportunity to give a bit of an understanding, a bit of a definition on what some of those things are. And again, it's not exhaustive, it's just an example of that type of change activity. And so what we cover in that is so managing successful programs. So that's about a structured program level change that has individual projects underneath it that's looking at cultural and behavioral change, that's looking at outcomes, not necessarily outputs. We look at the linear adaptive ones from, say, the APM and their project management methods, which is a typical project life cycle. And that's about developing products or outputs and measuring their effectiveness. We then look at, say, agile change management. And this is a hybrid of agile methods with change management methodology, which is about engaging individuals in the process of going on the change journey, but using the incremental approach to designing, engaging, developing, and rolling it out. But instead of being output focused and product focused, it's outcome focused. Mel Franklin did a really great session on agile change management at the festival in February. So if you want to have a look at that session, it's on the platform if you scroll back through the agenda to the February Tuesday session, and catch up with her about agile change management. We then have some of the agile techniques, so Scrum and Kanban. I appreciate these aren't exhaustive, and it just gives you an idea of different approaches, whether you're using Scrum sprints and the backlog, whether you're using the Kanban boards and the process of flowing activities through the stages. And then we've got things that are around improvements, whether that's quality improvements or service improvement and efficiency. So Six Sigma and Lean are examples of that, and we've got quality improvement methods as well. And the reason for looking at all of these, and somebody commented in a previous session about, couldn't we have an NHS method? And you go, well, that's like having a toolkit with just one tool in the bag. I think the thing about it is having people with enough knowledge and skill and experience to be able to use the right tool for the right job to make sure it gets the right outcome that you need. And I think that's one of the things that things like the apprenticeships can really help with. If you think of this as a plumbing example, a plumber doesn't go along with, his apprentice with just one tool. They have a bag of tools and they learn how to use those tools through experience. And that's something that the apprenticeships can really help with, is applying their knowledge and the practices, testing them out, seeing how they work, reflecting on that, and then adapting and progressing as they go. So there's a real opportunity to both learn, test out, experiment with some of these different methods, learn a bit more about them, and also how and when you can apply them to best effect. So I'm just going to cover a couple of them just to give you a flavour of what's the same and what's different. And one of the things I'd be interested in seeing what the similarities are between them. Sorry, I'll just take a quick sip. So this is the updated Managing Successful Programs methodology. It's been updated to reflect the VUCA environment we find ourselves in, the agile nature of change, and the sort of ambiguity of the circumstances we find ourselves working in. And so it has, as part of it, principles in relation to how you go about it, a bit like Agile, where it has its principles for how you go about Agile rather than processes. This also has themes, so it has areas for development, so that will include things like the organization, the design, the justification, and structure. And then at the heart of it, we have the phases. And within that, what you will find is that, a bit like the agile cycles, but over a long period of time, there are tranches of development within the program management method. So rather than trying to do a 3-year program in a linear fashion, what you'll do is you'll chunk it up into component elements that you roll out. So you roll out the first tranche, and once that's effectively in place, you can then start and roll out the second tranche and look at designing and developing it as you go. So it's not all in one place. So that just gives you a flavor of the managing successful programs. And again, with reference to the Axelos guides. The document should be attached to this as well as some of the other sessions. You can go in and look at the full document and read through it to your heart's content and find out more about it. Now, I know there's many different agile diagrams, and I was trying to find some that looked at the difference between agile and Scrum. And again, these focus on principles, behaviors, ways of working, values, and then a sort of cyclical process of design, testing, prototyping, testing, getting user feedback, and then reflecting and moving forward with iterative rollout and continuous delivery of usable products. So getting your minimum viable product out there and building on that in a modular way as you go. So you're starting to get the value from the input as quickly as possible. The manifesto talks about individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. So in contrast to Prince 2, because that's the one that's really got the comprehensive documentation as a framework. The others are much more kind of flexible. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So it's more of a partnership rather than a procurement exercise where you're procuring somebody else to do the work and you're just holding them to account for it. And then responding to change over following the plan. And I think there's been comments said today about, there's no way you could plan a whole program and it not change by next week. All the methodologies are all designed to adapt to responding to change now. MSP has built that in, and so are the other methods as well. And that's just the environment we're in now. Lean production systems. So this is about reducing waste and increasing efficiency. And I don't know if you noticed yet, but there's an awful lot of circles going on. And I think this reflects the sort of cyclical nature of reviewing, testing, experimenting, reflecting to see how these things impact on the environment you're changing into, and then working through that again. And then again, we have another circle. So quality improvement rather than system efficiency. The Institute for Health Improvement is sort of a big developer of that for the healthcare sector. But this particular model, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, is very much a well-known one in many fields. So that just gives you kind of an idea of some of the principles that underpin some of those methods. But then you say, well, actually, what's the right one for which kind of change? So one of the things that we have in the guide is, the project and change capability framework, along with the project methodologies and the project types, is then a bit of an idea of which would have a pretty good match. And as I said at the start, this isn't necessarily the same for everybody or everything. It's just that if you've only learned how to use one tool, it might not be the best tool for the particular job you're trying to do. So within the document, you have a view that looks at things like cost efficiency and service improvement. Then you're looking potentially at lean or the APM in terms of the process that would probably be a really good fit for that. Quality improvement, again, Six Sigma or the improvement methodologies. The digital informatics, obviously, we're looking at using potentially Scrum, Kanban, and Agile methods. But then also in terms of things like transformation, it's a bit more of a choice. It depends on how complex it is. You might use the APM, managing successful programs, if it's bigger and complex. And then there's other methods we've included in there as well, and also an idea of which might fit. Now, you might think that you have a different opinion. Get that in the chat if you disagree, or if you think that those aren't correct. Let's hear the discussion. Let's see what you think in relation to it. The reason being that I think we need to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, pick the right approach that fits the change we're trying to put in place, and then adapt it to suit the circumstances. And what we'll probably find going forward is that instead of being a kind of we use one, actually we have a modular toolkit that brings together different component parts. Because very much nowadays we get programs that might have an element that is around designing a new service, or it might be around creating new products. It might have a digital element because there's a website to go with it. There might be functionality that needs user engagement and interaction. So you might be creating policy, you might be creating new services, you might be creating digital products. All of these things as projects within a program could follow a different method based on the way in which that project is approaching it. And it's about deciding that what's the best method for you, your program or project team, the organization that you're trying to do it within, and also how you can communicate and share that with the people who are working on it with you. So everybody's clear about what's the method that's most appropriate and why, and then taking them through it. And I think this is where we need to focus on developing knowledge, skills, and experience in this. Because often people go, oh, well, it causes confusion or causes complexity, or people don't understand why. And it's like saying, well, we've got a toolkit full of tools, but we only need to know how to use one of those tools. So rather than confuse everybody, we won't tell them about the rest of the tools. We'll just use the hammer to hit things with. We need to create more understanding and knowledge of the different methods, why we have them. We need to educate our SROs in terms of the approach we are choosing to take as program and project managers and how we're going to go about implementing them. And then we need to work out how we're going to manage and govern them as we go through the whole process. And I think when it comes to things like governance, there are touch points. We've been doing some work recently in HE in terms of different methodologies. So we have the CIO's team doing digital work. We have projects using different methodologies. And for us to provide some governance centrally, what we need is touch points around decision making. So it's fine if you want to follow the agile, stages. So, you've got your discovery, your agile, your alpha, your beta live, etc. And you can use the same touch point for decision making as you do for, say, MSP and the initiation stage. But it's sharing that and communicating that and making sure everybody's clear about that. I'm going to introduce a new dimension to this now, because I think that project types and project methodologies doesn't necessarily cover everything, because you can have a digital project that is very clear and straightforward and linear. We've done it before, we've been there, we've created many of these, we know how to do it, and we have a blueprint for doing these kinds of projects. So one of them might be the e-learning for healthcare team. So they develop e-learning modules, and they just churn them out. It's an 8-week cycle. What you come out with is basically a kit. And it's the only thing different is the content. So the project manager bashes those out on an 8-weekly cycle and basically just follows the script. They know exactly what they're doing. They repeat it over and over and over again. That's a very simple linear project. That's what we'd call painting by numbers. But the same team might suddenly be presented with something very complex and foggy. So like the team was presented with a mission to transform digital capability without any clear indication of why or what the end result looks like or how to go about it or what do they mean by digital capability. And for a team that's really good at producing these really, tight linear projects, this was very, confusing. They didn't know where to start with it. So having a method may not necessarily help you deal with the different levels of complexity. So I'm going to introduce you to another level of assessment. And this is something you're doing right at the start, up front, when you get your remit to do something, or you've got an idea to do something. Complexity is often described in the way in which it's on the flip chart in the little diagram. People understand it as being very linear. Oh, it's A to B, you just create a thing, job done. But actually, in reality, it's much more complex than that. And one of the things we need to look at when we're starting something new isn't about whether it's digital or not, whether it's, MSP or agile. It's about, has it been done before? Is it new and innovative? Is it familiar to you? Have you done it before? Is it something that you have explored and you have knowledge and experience of? And is there clarity of why the change is needed? Because if you aren't able to answer those questions, or you don't know what the answers are, then the first thing you need to tackle is that level of complexity. So we've seen earlier from Tam the really fantastic and funny Fix It Now in terms of looking at risk management differently. Cube also has a really good way at looking at projects, and it looks at projects in terms of types of change, not in terms of whether they're digital or policy or service or product development. They look at it from a level of complexity. So what we have is on the one hand, a painting by numbers project. So we know what we're doing and we know how to do it. So that's pretty straightforward and linear. And then they have one that they describe as a movie. And that might be, we know how to do it, but we don't know what it's going to end up with. And that to me is a bit like diagnostics. So a patient comes in, you don't know what's wrong with them. Now, in order to work out what's wrong with them, you follow the process. So you follow the process to go through a series of diagnostic tests that starts to reveal the outcome and discard others until at the end of it, you go, ta-da, this is what's wrong with you. And the movie project's a bit like that. So you follow the process because you've got, you know how to go about doing it, but it will be revealed at the end. A quest is a bit like, I think of it as orienteering. When you go on a walk, you have a map. The ultimate aim is to get to the pub at the end of it, obviously. So you know where you're trying to get to, but your options for getting there are many. And you could go lots of different routes, go over the high cliff, go through the water, go round the long way. You have options about how to get there. And your choice is to weigh up those different options to choose which is the best way for you. And then we have the Foggy projects. Now, I'd be really interested how many people have a very structured and linear methodology like Prince2, but actually their projects are quite foggy. They don't know what it is they're trying to achieve because it's not really clearly defined. It's not got some really hard edges that are clearly measurable. And they don't necessarily know how to go about it because it's really complex in terms of interdependencies and stakeholders and cross organizations. And therefore, actually, it's quite a foggy project. And figuring out how to go about it is quite challenging. A lot of the projects we get are like this because some of it's about we want to take things into a new direction. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it looks like. We need to work it out. And therefore, a foggy project is going to be tackled very differently from a painting by numbers project. So painting by numbers process flow for anybody who wanted to look at their very simple project. You have definition, you agree the terms of reference, so you know what you're doing, you know what everybody's agreed to do. You plan it, you resource it, you implement it, you do some stages, you hand it over and you close it out. Job done. That's like the e-learning modules. 8 weeks, defined and agreed, follow the process. Jobs are good, as they say in Barnsley. And then a movie, bit more complex because you've got to explore the goals, work out the stakeholders, look at where you're trying to get to, working through the process until you start to get to the point where what the users need is starting to be defined. And then you're developing and delivering it. The quest is about getting clarity and commitment to heading to that destination, looking at your options, assessing those, resourcing it, looking at how you're going to go about it, and then following that process and implementing it. And then a Foggy project is all about getting engagement. So it's about figuring out what's the complexities around you. So that might be, well, we don't want to go too far in this direction because we don't know if anybody's already there. We don't know what's already happening in this space. So we need to do some research. We need to find out. So this will be things like doing a lot of initial stakeholder engagement, seeking them, identifying the stakeholders, establishing communication. So you make sure information's flowing, you're keeping up with what's going on with other people. You're gaining problem agreement. This is like, what's the problem we're trying to fix? Have we all got agreement on that? And then what's the vision for the destination? Where is it we want to go to? And then you go into the process of, now we've decided where we are, where we're going, we need to then resource the team and plan it. But you'll notice there's incremental planning. Because you're in the fog and some of it might not be clear, you might go, Well, we'll do some testing. We'll do some prototyping. We'll test it out with the users, see what they think. If not, we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll test it again. So again, it's a different way of looking at what is actually kind of probably familiar to most of you in terms of the methodologies that you use. But when you're starting to look at a project, it's worth looking at what kind of change am I trying to make? What's the outcome I'm trying to achieve? What's the best fit in terms of method for going about it that's going to give me the results I want in the most effective way? But also looking at complexity. Because if you're used to doing painting by numbers projects and you get given a foggy project, that's going to be really difficult to work out. And it's knowing how quickly you can move out of the fog and into some kind of certainty. You don't always get it, but at least if you work at it, you can clarify and maybe turn it into a quest once you've got agreement on where you're going, or into a movie and go, if we follow this process, hopefully we'll get to some agreement about, where we end up together in the end. So that's just a really quick overview. Now, this was just an introductory session. Now, I appreciate some of you might have known all of that already. Some of you it might be very new to, and some of you might be, well, a bit of a mix of both. All of the resources are included in the guide below, in the documents and the links. But the most important thing, coming back to my first point, is when it comes to doing a change, is not being tied to one method or one approach. It's about trying to keep at the front of your mind, what are you trying to achieve? What's the purpose of it? Why are you doing it? And, and making sure that when you do approach it, that it's the right way for you, for the change, and for the environment you're doing it within. And that means thinking for yourselves in terms of that process and approach. And you are all individuals. So thank you. I've kind of come to the end of the presentation part of it. Do we have any questions from, oh, sorry, before we go into questions, I do have one last poll for you. So the last poll is really just for me in terms of thinking about what next, because this was an introductory session. This was just a quick overview. But what would be useful for us to understand is, are there any specific methodologies or types that would be really useful for you to find out more about? Because you go, well, actually, I've been using this method, but actually the environment I'm working in is probably more of this kind of change. And therefore, it'd be great to find out more about it. So you can pick as many as you like. And also, I'm not an expert in all of these. So if we have people who are really good and confident in a particular methodology and you'd be happy to share that knowledge and learning with others, please can you put it in the chat? Because what we'd love to do is we'd love to get you doing a lunch and learn session on one of these particular methods. And whichever ones sort of are get the votes in terms of what people would like to find out more about, that's what we'll put up, and we'll get those organized. So please do volunteer if you've got knowledge and experience of putting them in place. We would really value that. So let's have a look and see what the results are looking like. So the agile methods are really standing out. So nobody wants to see more of Prince 2. Good for you. Oh no, somebody has. It might seem like I have a bit of a downer on Prince 2. People that have known me for a while know I don't recommend it. And there's a really good reason for that. The world doesn't work in that way anymore. It was designed sort of 45 years ago, and it was designed for big, complex infrastructural projects like, I don't know, High Speed 2 or building an aircraft carrier. And trying to manage all of that complexity it's really good to have that kind of structure and control. It's not so good in the very people-focused and very adaptive environments that we tend to work in. Some of the other methods are better suited to it. So that's why we don't tend to recommend it for most projects in the NHS. So we have Agile has come out on top in terms of people wanting to find out more about it. There's also the project lifecycle and change management, a little bit of some of the others, and we'll see what we can do around that. So for those of you interested in the change management, The next Compass Day, Compass 3, which is going to be on the 30th of November, is all about change management. So the whole thing, start to finish, and we've got some really great speakers already lined up for that one, including the Change Management Institute, who are going to come and talk a bit about it. And we're going to get Mel Franklin back to talk about agile change, and we're going to get somebody from the ProSci organization to come and talk about that as well. So that we can cover. That's really great. That's really insightful. Thank you for that. And so now, any questions or comments or challenges?
Well, nobody seems to want to challenge you at all, Joe. There are no questions, but there's quite a lot of, yeah, quite a lot of chat. Nobody wants to debate you.
No, absolutely open to it, please.
There is a lot of commentary in the chat around most projects feeling like foggy projects, or you might start with a bit of clarity, and then you encounter fog.
Yes.
Then more clarity, then a bit more fog.
Yeah,
is there a methodology to suit that?
Well, I think that the point about it is, any of these methods, you don't pick it right at the start and stick with it religiously. And I'm using the religiously word appropriately here with the analogy. Don't stick with it religiously. You use it for the section or the element that you're using it, that you need it for at that point in time. If you start off with a foggy project and you do some really good work, you engage with the stakeholders, the senior leaders, the people who are going to be using it in the end, and you get some real clarity about what the problem is, what's the vision of the future, and you've got that suddenly clear, you go, brilliant, okay, it's now either a movie request, move it on. Or you go, right, we've got real clarity around it. There's a lot of component parts. We need to build lots of different stuff. We need to change how people behave. And therefore, we'll probably use MSP. But the point is, you can look and adapt any or all of these as you go. And our jobs as project professionals is to be the guide. So to guide other people. And it's a bit like sailing a ship. Ships don't sail in one direction. They tack based on which way the wind blows them. They have to nudge and change and move on a regular basis. And our job is to keep going to make sure that we keep maneuvering to end up in the destination we should be arriving at. Choosing one direction and sticking to it isn't going to get us where we need to go. We need to flex with the tides, with the wind, with the storms that come up and throw us off course. And we need to be the ones that do the bearing settings and help us move forward from that point. So it's an ongoing and iterative process in terms of understanding where you are, where you're going, and what you need to keep doing to keep on course to get where you need to get to.
Okay, that's really interesting because it implies that as project managers, we really need to commit to learning a smorgasbord of project management methodologies, because even if we know only a little about a particular project methodology and we think that will suit a project, we've still got the job of educating everybody around us why we think that's a good idea. And it sounds like a massive educational project, both for ourselves and for everyone around us. I'm sure a lot of us, and it was reflected in the chat, find that organizations have a standard methodology and you stick to that,
yeah.
or you get booted out, or nobody knows what to do with you. So you set us all a massive challenge. So how do we free up the time for that?
I don't think we all need to become experts in these, but what we do need to know is we need to know enough of the basics to understand what kinds of change we're doing and then what would be the most appropriate one. So when you look at something like a foggy project, now for me, if I got somebody chucked a digital transformation project at me, I would be lost in the fog. Because I don't do that kind of project. That's not my background. That's not the kinds of projects I've worked on. And therefore, it might be foggy to me, but it might be painted by numbers to you. So it's not just about we should all know everything. Actually, we should know what we're good at, what we know a little bit about, and also who's the right person for the right job. You wouldn't get a plumber in to do an electrician's job, or you wouldn't get a car mechanic in to fix your roof. The fact that as different project types, that was why the question at the start in terms of what kinds of projects do we work on? If you're somebody who tends to work in digital transformation projects, chances are that's mostly the kinds of projects you do. You're probably not going to go from that to organizational change or to, say, policy projects or service development, because these are really different, or estates and infrastructure, because these are really different kinds of projects. And it may be that somebody doesn't have a really broad breadth, that they're a master and has a lot of these, but most of us won't. So it's not only the right tool for the right kind of job, it's also the right kind of journeyman or professional to do it. And it's knowing what you are and aren't competent and capable to do. So when we look organizationally at capability, we need to look at what are the kinds of projects we have, what's the kind of capability we need.
And that throws up a really interesting point that's come through in the chat, and it's to do with language. And the organisations that we work in will say such and such project is transformational, and it really isn't.
Oh, yeah.
Or they will badge it as transformational, and it really isn't. So perhaps they've gone out to buy in the wrong person to do that job. So that's where I was thinking there's a massive educational program to take place within organisations itself.
Yeah.
And it just makes the job of being a project manager that bit more challenging. Oh, we love a challenge, don't we?
I think the thing is, if you look at, earlier on in the day, we looked at, at the lunchtime session, we looked at maturity models in terms of program management, project management. And the thing about it is, if we're honest with ourselves, most of our organizations are not really very mature in terms of our project capability and our project methodologies, because we don't really invest the time and effort in developing and retaining that capability. The fact that, quite a few people have sort of said, oh, well, I'm a subject matter expert, or or we know that that's where they end up being, and everybody can call themselves a project manager. And therefore, when you look at how we go about doing some of these programs, projects, the bar in some ways is quite low, and anything we do to improve it in terms of ourselves, our knowledge, our capability, and then how we respond to requests to do projects. So if you suddenly got a estates and infrastructure project lumped on you, you go, oh, well, you're a project manager, you can deal with this. And you go, hang on a minute, I'm not the best person for the job. This needs this kind of skill and competence, or, and therefore, if we are more knowledgeable and equipped, we can help guide those around us to the right, a more appropriate way of doing things, shall I say.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I'm just checking if there's anything else in the chat that needs coming through. Robert Mays says, hi, Joe. We should really include Eli Goldratt's theory of constraints, as a lot of healthcare challenges are managing the delivery of services with bottlenecks, such as equipment, trained clinical staff, etc.
Well, the whole area of service improvements and quality is one area that I think we need to perhaps understand a bit better collectively. And so for those that do have those experiences of delivering that kind of change, it'd be really great if you'd be willing to do a session on it with all of us. So Robert, well done for volunteering to do a lunch and learn on that one. Excellent. We will take you up on that. And anybody else who's got a particular area that they think people should know about, or methods that are of particular value in this sector, post them up and we will work with you to get something in place so that everybody can learn about it.
Okay, Joe, I think we have come to the end of our time there. So thank you very much indeed for shedding light in a very foggy area for us. And everybody, you should find the end of session code coming up very shortly, which you can use to win prizes from Compass 2. And hope to see you again in the next session. Thank you all very much.
Please give us your feedback, always welcome. Thank you very much.